Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Johnson. I'm the Chief Community Engagement Officer here at the FSHD Society. And together here today with my colleague, Lee Reynolds, who's in the background. She's our Chief Program Strategist. We would like to welcome you to today's FSHD University webinar. For those of you who don't know us, the FSHD Society is the world's largest research-focused patient advocacy organization that's focused solely on FSHD. We have over 30 volunteer-led chapters across the US and in Canada, and we're part of a 20+ country World FSHD Alliance. Our mission is to find treatments and a cure for FSHD while empowering our families. So we offer these free FSHD University webinars and so many other educational events, many of you have been to educate and empower everyone that's affected by FSHD, just to become their own best advocate when it comes to their care. So today we welcome Dr. Kent Drescher. He's a psychologist whose FSHD has enriched his perspective on psychological resilience, both in his own practice at home and in his career when he was working with veterans with PTSD. Kent and his wife, Sue, also lead the Bay Area chapter of the FSHD Society. So hi, Sue, hi, Kent. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Drescher.
Okay, hello, everyone. It's really good to be able to be here. I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk. I much would prefer to be able to see and be with you in person, and it's always a challenge learning to do a presentation on Zoom because you don't get that same kind of emotional feedback from the audience that you do in other contexts. Anyway, I'm happy to be here. I am going to share some slides here. Okay. All right, so I've been asked to talk about resilience related to FSHD. Here's the dictionary definition of resilience. Resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. It's toughness. It's also used to describe the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape, or elasticity. The definition that myself and colleagues used in one of our papers is it's the human ability to withstand stressful challenges and retain or regain normal functioning. All right. Now, how do I change my slides? Here we go. So I spent my career working for the National Center for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder at one of their locations in Menlo Park, California. When I entered the field of psychology 35+ years ago, PTSD was a brand new disorder, had just been placed into the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And one of the primary questions about PTSD was, why is it that in talking about soldiers, two soldiers go through the same traumatic experience and one of them emerges fine and the other one emerges with problems? And so the question were, what are the risk factors and the protective or resilience factors that are associated with good or poor outcomes? And a lot of that work initially was informed from people studying children. Michael Rudder was a child psychiatrist in Britain who had worked with young children for many years. He had identified 6 risk factors for children who would, as adults, end up with mental health problems. And you can see those factors there. Children who experienced none of those factors, by and large, didn't develop mental health problems. Children that had 2 of those factors had a 4-fold increase in risk of mental health problems as adults. And children who experienced more than 4 had a 20 times greater risk. And so clearly there were experiences that children had in childhood that affected the trajectory of their lives all the way into adulthood. Another study that came out a decade or so later came out of the Kaiser Permanente healthcare system, the place where I get my healthcare. Vincent Folletti, it was a physician there, and he did a major study that identified 10 childhood risk factors and found that those factors were predictive of physical and mental health problems as adults, and even predictive of early death. And you can see those factors grouped by category: abuse, neglect, family chaos. Having 4 or more of those things placed individuals at 4 to 12 times the risk of having alcohol, drug problems, depression, suicide, 2 to 4 times the rates of bad, unhealthy health behaviors, things like smoking, and then found much higher rates of heart disease, lung disease, liver disease, cancer, and even early death. So childhood risk factors were in play all into adulthood. Well, that's all well and good, except most of those things that those individuals found are things that children don't have any control over. They're things that occur in their environment, in their homes and families. Perhaps they're even embedded in their genetics, their biology. And we know that genetics and biology can make a big impact on our lives. So the real key question is, are there any factors that help us be resilient in the face of intense stress that we can control, that we can actually do something about? We can't go back and change our childhood, but is there something today that we can do that will begin to make us more resilient? And in fact, there is. I'm going to talk with you today about one of those factors that research has suggested is associated with greater resilience, and that is called psychological flexibility. The quote, I'm going to read the quote below here. Stephen Hayes is a psychologist who has spent the last 40 years at the University of Nevada in Reno. He created during his career a form of cognitive behavioral therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. And this quote comes from his most recent book from 2019 called A Liberated Mind. It's actually a really great book. I would encourage people to pick it up and read it. It's got a lot of really good resource information, particularly around psychological flexibility. So let me just read this. Psychological flexibility is the ability to feel and think with openness, to attend voluntarily to your experience of the present moment, and to move your life in directions that are important to you, building habits that allow you to live life in accordance with your values and aspirations. It's about learning not to turn away from what is painful, instead turning toward your suffering in order to live a life full of meaning and purpose. Well, why am I talking about ACT? It's important because just this year, a randomized control trial of acceptance and commitment therapy was completed that focused on improving quality of life in people with muscle disease, including FSHD. I think at least a quarter to almost a half of the patients in the controlled trial had FSHD. And the findings were quite positive. So what is ACT? I just put a very complicated slide on the screen, and I'm not going to talk all the way through it, but what I want to call your attention to is, you see in the center psychological flexibility, And surrounding that in a circle are these 6 what we call core processes of ACT. And then you'll see vertically that those are categorized into 3 categories, one being openness, the second being awareness, and the third being engagement. And I'm going to talk about each of those processes in a little more detail as we proceed. But now I want to turn to a second book that I just came across. This is a brand new book, just came out in June. The author, Steve Magnus, is a track coach. He is now a world-renowned expert on health and human performance. He's written a number of books, and this is his most recent book, and it's called Do Hard Things: Why We Get Resilience Wrong and the Surprising Science of Real Toughness. And that book caught my attention in part because in high school, I tried out for a number of sports, and I didn't know I had FSHD at the time. There was no family history. And I was interested in sports. I tried out for a number of sports and got cut from the teams until I came across cross country. And cross country running, apparently, they don't cut people because really not very many people want to do that. And so I got to be on the team for the year and enjoyed it, learned a lot, wasn't really very good at it. But that caught my attention, the fact that he was a track coach. So as I looked at his book, he divided his book into 4 parts, each of which oriented around what he calls a pillar of toughness. And these are those 4 pillars that are in his book. The first one he calls ditch the facade. In other words, don't pretend you're tough. Embrace reality. Second one is listen to your body. The third one is respond instead of react. And then the fourth one is transcend discomfort. And as I read through the book and I looked at those pillars of toughness, what I realized was that reflected in those pillars were all of the 6 ACT core processes. And I've laid them out on the column just beside there. Also included in the book, scattered throughout, are these coaching maxims that he sets apart from the text of the book. And I wanted to just highlight a few of them because I think they're particularly interesting and important. So the first one here, real toughness is experiencing discomfort or distress, leaning in, paying attention, and creating space to take thoughtful action. It's navigating discomfort to make the best decision you can. Second one, respond to reality. For most of us, we're not only responding to the actual stress, but to the reverberations of it. Tough individuals learn to match perception with reality. What does he mean by reverberations? Well, when I think about that, I realize that with FSHD, when I enter into a situation and I'm sort of pondering, am I going to be able to do this? My head is often also filled with memories of times when in the past when it's gone badly, or also filled with thoughts of worry about what if this happens. So his suggestion is respond to what's there in the present moment. So the third one uses a unusual word. Poor interoception leads to poor predictions, which leads to lower toughness and worse decision-making. Well, what's interoception? We're all familiar with our five senses, most of which are focused in and around our heads. So sight, sound, smell, taste, and then the feeling on our skin. Well, it turns out there are other senses, several other senses that we don't hear as much about. Interoception is one of those. Interoception is the sensations that come from deep within our bodies. It's our body awareness. And Coach Magnus suggests that paying attention, learning to become more aware of the state of our body is an important key to toughness. And then finally, he writes, purpose is the fuel that allows you to be tough. Meaning is the glue that holds our mind together, allowing us to both respond and recover. And I really think that's powerfully true. I realized that with running. Nobody wants to spend hours doing something that's painful, difficult, and unpleasant unless they're doing it for a purpose. And that is often the case with living with FSHD. Finding a way forward to meaning and purpose that drives us forward is a big part of what it means to have resilience and toughness. All right. So now for the next few minutes, I'd like to focus a little bit on those three columns that I pointed out: awareness, openness, and engagement. So what is this awareness that I'm talking about here? Well, one part of it is a practice that's called mindfulness. Jon Kabat-Zinn has defined mindfulness as paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And those three characteristics are all part of what it means to be mindful. Well, living mindfully can be thought of as being the opposite of living on autopilot. You know, our brains are amazing adaptive organs. And because our brains receive a constant flow of information 24/7 from our eyes and ears and mouths and noses and from within our bodies, that constant need to process this massive amount of streaming information means that the brain tends to make shortcuts to make things easier. So then when we have a behavior that we're going to do a lot, our brain automatizes it so that we can do it without thinking. You know, if you think about, for me, I recall the time learning to drive. And the first time I sat behind the wheel, the driver instructor next to me, and I'm getting ready to start the car, my mind was just racing. And I remember, you know, trying to think through all the things I need to do. I need to put my hands in the right position on the wheel. I need to, you know, have my foot firmly on the brake. I need to know where the key is to turn the ignition, all of those things. And it felt like it was too much. It was overwhelming. But then after a few weeks, after a few months of driving, suddenly, you know, I was free to talk with my friends while I'm driving, or listen to the radio, change the stations on the radio, all the things that we do every day while driving without even having to think about it. But we also realize that there's problems with automatic behavior. We know too many people who try to multitask while they're driving. I know I've seen during long commutes, people brushing their teeth, combing their hair, eating their lunch, talking on the phone, and doing all those things simultaneously, because driving is automatic until it isn't. Until the inability to pay attention to both things simultaneously results in an accident. So one part of awareness is learning to be able to intentionally pay attention to the flow of our inner experience, our thoughts, our emotions, our physical sensations, our memories. Paying attention to the present moment experience inside of our bodies, which is interoception, and outside of our bodies. Then there's a second part of awareness. One of the problems with automatic behavior is that our conscious, intentional self sort of goes away. It fades out of our awareness. But one of the goals of ACT is to help us become more aware of the part of ourselves that's separate from our inner experience, that stands aside even in the midst of discomfort or anxiety or whatever our inner experience is bringing. It's the part of ourselves that can step back from that and make choices. Automatic behavior takes away our ability to choose because the brain just does it. Part of ACT is learning to be able to step back from that automatic those processes, to see what's happening in the moment, and to choose a direction that's based not on habit, but our values, choosing what we do because it's what's important to us. All right, so let's talk about the second of those major processes, opening up to our inner experience. One of the things that we learn as children early on is that it's important, and there are ways that we have to do, steps we have to take in order to avoid physical danger and to control the environment around us. You know, first thing our parents tell us when we go outside and are now walking around is, don't run into the street. You might get hit by a car. Our parents teach us things like, don't touch the stove. It might be hot. They teach us that if we're cold, we should go inside and put on a coat. Or if we're hot, we should go outside and jump in the pool. There are ways that we can avoid or control our physical environment outside to make our lives more workable and pleasant. But the problem is that we tend to take those same strategies and try to use them with our inner experience, to use those things to relate to unpleasant thoughts or difficult emotions. And what we find is that sometimes that's counterproductive. Research actually suggests that when somebody tries to prevent having thoughts, what actually happens is that those thoughts increase in frequency. You may be able to suppress thoughts for a few moments, but once you stop trying to do that, they actually rebound and they come back more. Similarly with feelings, trying to avoid painful feelings often prolongs them. And there are consequences as well for trying to avoid internal experiences. Is that avoidance is it's a huge weapon. It may be effective in the short term, but it also cuts us off from lots of other opportunities that might give us a different experience. And in many times, it will keep us stuck in the place where we're actually trying to get out of. So opening up is learning to develop and train the willingness to sit with unpleasant thoughts, unpleasant feelings, unpleasant sensations, difficult memories, Why would I do that? Well, it's the same question as why do runners, why are they willing to endure pain for long periods of time? It's not because they like pain. It's because it's in the service of doing something that matters to them. And in the case of competitive runners, it's winning. Opening up is also about strengthening through practice our ability to loosen our grip, loosen the grip that thoughts and worries about our situation have on us. It doesn't mean that we can make those thoughts or worries go away. It means that we hold them more loosely. And loosening our grip frees up space where we can take actions that take us in a different direction, a direction that's more consistent with our values. So opening up is about choosing to respond to our inner experience intentionally and rather than reacting automatically. All right. Well, what's that third piece? Is engagement. And really, engagement is about how do I know what's important to me? And how do I begin to do the things day after day that are important to me? And in that context, ACT talks about values. Values, as defined by ACT, are activities that give our lives meaning. We don't want to think about values as goals, because goals oftentimes are like little check marks on a list. You know, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. Values aren't goals. Instead, values are more like a compass. They help us find our chosen direction. They help us to make choices based on the directions in which we want our lives to go. So while goals can be attained and checked off a list, values are ever before us. If I'm on the West Coast of the US, and if I were to decide to go west, I could continue going west. Very quickly, I'd end up in the ocean. But if I continued going west, I'd come back around and back around and back around. I could go all the way around the planet going west. Values are like that. They're not attained, but we can perform actions that reflect those values. And we can continue to do that day after day, moment after moment, year after year, across our lives. So the next piece, though, is it's not enough to have values. Values as a direction are meaningless. They only take on meaning when we actually engage in actions that express the values. And so one of the tasks for people involved with ACT is committed action. It's identifying the direction we want to go and committing ourselves to engage in those activities persistently without giving up. On the right of this particular slide, you'll see what's called a bold move exercise. And it's very simple. You identify the value that you want to express. You make a list of particular actions that you could take to express that value. You identify what might be the obstacles that could get in the way. And then you commit yourself today to doing one of those actions. All right. At that point, I'm going to end. I thank you for your willingness to listen, and now maybe we can have some time to ask questions and engage with each other.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I personally have a lot of questions. But people in our audience, please attending, if you have some questions for Kent, go ahead and type them now in the Q&A. A few things came to mind for me, Kent, and if you don't mind, I would just like to ask something for myself. So aside from what you call the bold move exercise, if somebody we're really interested in, you know, consciously changing a habit or what you called an automatic behavior, what would be the first thing that you would recommend that they do, or just how to get started? How would somebody get started in doing that?
Mhm. So I think each of those processes are involved in that at one level. I'd say starting with awareness. So when a behavior is automatic, it's no longer under our conscious control or even our awareness. So we sometimes find ourselves doing things and we don't even realize, why did we do this? Or, you know, it's what we always do, right? And that's really the essence of a habit. It's the thing that we always do. And changing habits is not an easy process. You know, I know for me, exercise has always been a part of my life. And I used to remember hating January and February. And it's not because it was cold. It's because when you go to the gym in January and February, you no longer have the workstations to yourself. All of a sudden, there's this massive influx of people who've made New Year's resolutions to exercise and lose weight, and they all show up at the gym for about 8 weeks.
Yep.
And then in March, all those folks are gone. Most of those folks are gone. And you're back to being able to do your habit, right?
Right.
So it's not that easy. People make resolutions, and it's not that easy. So one piece is developing the skill to be able to notice in the present moment, what am I doing? What's happening with me? Why am I doing the things that I'm doing? Are these things that I'm doing the things that I want to be doing? And so that practice of mindfulness is actually a practice of being able to notice. So if you've set a course, like with a compass, and you're marching on a trail, what's the most important thing? To notice when you get off trail, right? So you have to be regularly checking in with yourself, regularly checking in with your values. And that's the thing that's really difficult. It's the discipline of checking and noticing. And that's where I've gone wrong oftentimes. You know, I've made numerous efforts to get back in shape and, you know, all those kinds of things. And it starts off great for a few days. And then other things start to take my attention. And if I don't have a regular practice of bringing myself back, bringing my attention back to what's important, and recommitting myself to actions on a daily, a weekly, a monthly, a continuous practice of doing that, it's difficult to stay on track. It's like we throw our compass away and just start walking. Anyway,
Right.
that's the first piece, I would say.
Okay, very good. I'm compartmentalizing all of this now, Kent. We had a comment from Alexandra asking if you'd ever read the Happiness Trap book, and if you have any comment about that.
Yeah. So the Happiness Trap book, I believe, is an ACT book. And there are numerous books out about ACT. Lots more that you can read. You know, the 10 minutes that I gave to ACT is woefully insufficient to describe it. But I would encourage you to look at, there are books about, ACT is a really interesting therapy. And let me just start back up a little bit. Most therapies are directed at particular disorders. ACT is not. It's one of a few interventions that's called transdiagnostic. And what that really means is it's not focused on reducing symptoms. It's really focused specifically on increasing psychological flexibility. And what the research data suggests is that increasing that flexibility pays off, doesn't matter what disorder you've got. There's benefits across the board, no matter what you're struggling with. And so you will find there are books on ACT targeted at specific different kinds of problems, whether it's anxiety or depression or diabetes, or, there's a whole range of things, alcohol and drugs. But the principles are the same. And I'm thoroughly convinced, and now there's some research to support that ACT is actually helpful in helping our quality of lives increase with FSHD. So
we seem to have heard that over and over. And you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I'm the voice crying in the wilderness. And one of the reasons I brought in this coaching book is that oftentimes there's stigma associated with mental health. People are reticent to go to therapists because, it's like shameful or it's embarrassing or whatever it might be. It feels uncomfortable. But somehow coaching is different, right? A lot of us feel perfectly comfortable hiring trainers or coaches to help us with things. So I thought it would be useful to bring in a book written by a coach that reflects some of the same principles that ACT advocates.
Awesome.
We're getting a number of questions about additional resources and access to your slides, Kent. And so I'm wondering if we will prep the recording, of course, and share that on our FSHDU channel and landing page. Would it be all right for us to share also the PDF?
Yeah, absolutely. I know June wasn't
Perfect.
able to make it today, but I sent June a PDF of the slides. You're more than welcome to distribute them. All of the specific references that I made in the presentation, there is a reference page at the very end.
Perfect.
So people can actually look them up and read the actual papers or books or whatever that.
Excellent.
Good. Thank you. Hey, Kent, Mike asks, do you have anything to say or advice about delayed gratification and how it applies to changing habits?
So I do think, I'm not exactly sure what he means about delayed gratification, but certainly rewards can be helpful along the way when you're trying to set goals and achieve values, when you're trying to change habits. It can be useful to start small, be persistent, and to give yourself some rewards down the road for continuing in the behavior. I do think that's played a role for me in making changes that I've wanted to make. They don't have to be big rewards either. I mean, people will do sort of amazing things for really ridiculous. You ever think about, I remember I felt so good. In junior high, I went out for the swim team. And I got a 3rd place at one of the races. And it was like, wow, that's great. And I got a ribbon. And that was like a big deal to me, like, whoa, I got a ribbon, but we will do things for little rewards, and having things to mark achievement, I do think are helpful and reasonable. During COVID, I received a health diagnosis that was concerning, especially with COVID, because it put me at risk for more severe illness. And I decided, okay, now is the time I really need to lose this weight I've been carrying. And so during COVID, when everybody else was putting on 40 pounds, I lost 80 pounds.
Wow.
And I did that by making my health a value, by using these ACT processes to notice and pay attention to the things that were threatening to pull my attention away. I have these automatic behaviors related to eating. If there's chips on the counter, all of a sudden they're in my hand. If I walk by the refrigerator, all of a sudden I've opened the door. And so I had to start noticing those behaviors and paying attention to them and opening up space to make different choices in order to accomplish the goals that I had. And I will say that when I got to my goal and I achieved it, not only did I do some little celebrations down the road, but when I got there, I actually had a little pendant engraved. I found it's kind of embarrassing, but it's I bought it online. It's actually a dog collar. The pendant on it had a compass on it, and they would do in free engraving. So I engraved my goal, the date it was achieved, and the value that represented for me. I had it engraved on this little dog collar pendant, and then I bought a chain for it and I wear it.
That's fantastic.
It's
Yeah.
a little reminder, you know, and my wife just told me a few days ago that, you know, you haven't been wearing your pendant lately. And so, you know, that's the challenge, is can you keep your goals, your values in front of you so that you're continually aware of them and making daily choices to accomplish things that express those.
What a great example. And along those same lines, Kent, we got a question from someone named Sue, or actually, and along those same lines, can you tell us a little bit about resiliency relates specifically to FSHD, and you personally, what results have you seen?
So for me, the resilience challenges center on, I found the part of the book on toughness really key in terms of bodily awareness. Because for me, being resilient with FSH means doing as much as I can do safely without stepping over the edge and causing injury or harm to myself. Staying as active as possible without overdoing it and then paying for it for weeks or months, or taking a fall that puts me out of commission. And I've met some folks in the society for whom a fall put them off their feet forever.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's finding a way to walk the edge where we're at our peak of possible performance without falling into the range where we're going to get hurt. It means recognizing that my emotional experience can get in the way, where I can be feeling so discouraged about changes in my bodies that I decide to not have to feel that discouragement. And so I withdraw, I pull back from activities that I love, and I cut myself off from people, from being with people, because it feels like it would be too hard. And so for me, a part of that resilience is entering into that struggle around what am I choosing to do? Who am I choosing to be with? And making those choices not in order to avoid unpleasant feelings or memories. You know, I mean, sometimes going to things, you know, I used to play guitar, and I don't do that anymore because my hands don't work. But I love guitar music. But sometimes being around guitar music is painful, because it's a reminder of things that I've lost. And yet, if I choose to avoid that, I miss out on the very thing that I love the most. You know, and so it's this Resilience for me is learning to be able to sort of navigate my emotional experience in ways that don't involve just simply avoiding. It means being willing to have unpleasantness, because with unpleasantness comes the very things that matter most to me. And so that's the struggle.
It is. It is.
We have a
Oh,
couple
goodness.
of questions about just sort of developing the skill of noticing, you know, and developing the skill that reminds yourself to slow down. And I know we touched on this a little, but could you speak a little bit more into that? And personally, for me, I've done some of this, and I even sometimes it's just a sticky note, you know, that says stop and breathe or stop and think, or what's your opinion on things like I have index cards sometimes with personal reminders, and I just read them aloud every day. So are those kinds of things, have you seen those be valuable, or do you have any other suggestions?
No, those things absolutely are valuable. Developing routines of practice, noticing, you know, something you do daily that involves noticing. We actually, Jen, if Jen is still here, Jen Egg, that would be, she's an expert at this. She's also a great resource in learning about mindfulness and living mindfully. One of the things that was helpful along my journey around weight was I started a little journal, and I, you know, my 30-year-old self would have laughed at me because I thought that was ridiculous. But my, you know, 60-plus-year-old self now has realized that making notations on a regular, semi-regular basis about the things that I'm noticing when I'm pursuing a particular goal helps me because I can go back to it. I can look to see, oh, this feels familiar. Well, there's a reason it feels familiar, because I did it before. I actually wrote about it before. And this is what happened when I didn't do this, you know, and so it becomes this log of your experience in noticing what's going on inside of you. And I don't write long things. I'll make quick notes. I'll put a date on it so I remember when it happened. I'll try to write a little bit of context about what was going on when I noticed this. And then I just leave it. And I may make, sometimes it's daily, sometimes it's weekly, sometimes a few weeks will go by. But I've got this journal now going back 3 years, and I can observe the whole process of change. And I've found that to be helpful. So.
Do you
that
think there's
could be scary.
a connection between sort of leaning in and providing these daily reminders and journaling? I love how you spoke about that, but and also extending a little bit of grace to ourselves. You know, I think people have to remember to allow yourself to grow and not add.
Yeah, no, it's about
yeah.
progress and persistence. It's not about perfection. It's a daily experience of, and anybody who's ever tried a mindfulness exercise, if we were doing an exercise and I ask you to focus on your breathing, one of the first things you notice is that your mind flits away. And you need to recognize that's not a mistake. That's normal. That's what minds do. The discipline is in learning to observe that that's happened and then redirect our attention. So mindfulness isn't about the ability to sustain attention forever. It's about the ability to recapture our attention and to focus it in the direction that we want it to focus. And to the willingness to be able to do that over and over and over and over and over again, even when our mind says, this is hopeless, you'll never do this, is it? You know, the things that minds say.
Right, right. We have a couple questions about CBT versus ACT. Could you just touch on the difference between those? And the question specifically is, would ACT be more effective for folks with FSHD?
So there are two psychotherapies that have been used related to FSHD. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. A form of that was used in two randomized trials focused on relieving fatigue with FSHD. And in both cases, the CBT was effective and helpful. And it was helpful through the mechanism of increasing the person's physical activity. You know, when you're fatigued, it seems counterintuitive that physical activity is actually the key to relieving it. Because it feels like your mind is telling you physical activity is the thing I don't want to do because I'm tired. But in the actual case, it's the opposite. And CBT was effective there. ACT in this trial that I just noted earlier was directed at much more broadly at quality of life in the experience overall of FSHD, not specifically just on fatigue. And it was also found to be effective. The differences between the two, cognitive behavioral therapy is sort of a really broad category for interventions that are generally focused on specific things. Like there's CBT for anxiety. There's CBT for depression. In this case, there was CBT directed at physical activity. Okay. Cognitive behavioral therapy it's a therapy that focuses on sort of redirecting the way your thoughts go, identifying thoughts that are distorted and trying to correct those, and then engaging in activities that are consistent with what you're trying to accomplish. So there are big similarities with ACT, as well as some small differences. I think the primary difference between ACT and traditional CBT is in the way that ACT engages with the mind and thoughts. ACT takes this perspective that people oftentimes are not very successful in changing their distorted thoughts. And so ACT takes a different focus, one that involves what we call willingness. So it's not, I'm going to engage in this attempt to try to change my thoughts. Rather, it's, I'm going to be willing to have those thoughts, but still step back, decides what's important, and do what matters anyway. So it's taking action even in the presence of unpleasant thoughts. So it engages with thoughts a little differently than traditional CBT. But aside from that, there are a lot of, overlapping commonalities.
And Jen even put a comment in our Q&A that if someone's interested in doing it themselves, there's actually a lot of self-guided therapies, practices on YouTube. So you can even YouTube ACT or CBT on YouTube and do some self-guided things. That's, yeah.
Yeah, tons of self-help resources out there for both disciplines. Yeah.
What was the title of the
Oh, somebody asked about the book I mentioned earlier, Steve Hayes' book called The Liberated Mind. And it is really excellent.
Easy question, Kent. You've heard the term, and Lee even used it a minute ago, leaning in. What do you mean by that?
So what I mean by that, I don't know what everybody means by that, but what I mean by that is really what ACT calls as acceptance or willingness. It's instead of turning away and trying to avoid unpleasant thoughts and emotions and sensations, it's opening up to them. It's allowing them to be there. It's being willing to have them. Now, willingness is not wanting. Nobody wants to have unpleasant feelings. But the reality is that unpleasant feelings come and go. we don't have a lot of control over whether they come and go. And so acceptance is not giving up. And oftentimes when people hear acceptance, they think, I mean, well, you're just saying I should give up in the face of FSHD. Not at all. No, and in actuality, I'm saying almost the opposite. Acceptance, willingness is turning towards the things that are most unpleasant, allowing them to be there while I still engage my values. There's a metaphor that ACT uses. It's called the tug of war with a monster. So if you imagine the most painful parts of your mental experience, you know, whether it's that voice that, you know, condemns you every single second for every mistake you've ever made, whatever that might be, whatever unpleasant emotional and cognitive experience that you have inside of you, imagine you're in a tug of war with that monster. And, you know, you go back and forth, and he pulls and you pull, and he pulls and you pull, and what's the reality is that when you're in a tug of war with a monster that's as big or bigger than you, you're stuck. You can't move forward. Well, what are the options? What do you do when you're in a tug of war with a monster? You drop the rope. Well, if you drop the rope, what happens? Well, does the monster go away? No. He still stays there yelling at you, offering you the rope to say, pull. But it frees you. You can take steps forward. You can move in the direction of your values as long as you're willing to know that, hey, the monster might be right there, still yelling at you, still talking to you. The difference is you're no longer stuck. You're moving toward what matters to you. And that's really, you know, a lot of what ACT is all about.
That's a great analogy. I think that really speaks to one of Jen's questions. She's asking, she says, one of her major challenges is resistance. She knows her values and can be very mindful of behavior that's inconsistent, but something in her does it anyway. Is that the monster?
Well, I don't know. I have that same experience. I think in all of us, there's you know, what comes to mind is the temperamental child. You know, it's like, I'm not gonna go, I'm not gonna go. We my wife takes our grandson, who's almost 4 now. He's 4 now, yes. Grandpa should know that. She takes him to speech therapy every week. And, you know, it's a really fun time with playing. He had a lot of problems with consonants when he's learning to talk, and still has some challenges. And so he goes there to practice and has a lot of fun with this speech therapist. But just yesterday, occasionally what will happen is he's having so much fun that when it's time to clean up, he'll get resistant and say, no, not going to clean up, and getting into a battle. Well, so I know one of the things that works with little kids is, you know, give some positive alternatives. You know, if you're running into resistance, step back, see if you can think of some alternative things that will still move you in the direction that you want to go, that you are willing to do, and try again. And that's the only thing I would have to say from my perspective of what works with me.
That's great. Well, we are out of time, unfortunately. There are lots of questions that haven't been answered, but Kent has graciously agreed to follow up with everyone who still has questions in the Q&A. So thank you for doing that very much. I appreciate that very much.
And our chapter email is in the slides, and so you're welcome to reach out by email, and I will respond.
Thank you, Kent. That's very much appreciated. So I will wrap up and just thank everyone for attending our FSHD University webinar today. Very, very special thank you to Dr. Drescher. Amazing presentation, great conversation, great information. Thanks for answering all of our questions today. Very much appreciated for being here, taking the time for being here today.
Well,
Our next webinar, no. You've helped me so much, Kent. Our next webinar is next month, September 15th, at the same time of 1 o'clock Eastern. Our guest speaker is super interesting. His name is Dr. Mark Tarnopolsky. He's a professor of pediatrics and medicine up at the McMaster University in Ontario, Canada. And hot topic also, he's going to be speaking about exercise and nutritional interventions specifically for the treatment of FSHD. So like I said, a very hot topic, so you won't want to miss that. We have so many great events coming up, especially our international walk and roll to cure FSHD. These events are happening all over the US and Canada starting in September, one coming up in the Bay Area with Kent and Sue. So be sure to visit our website to find a walk that's near you, or join the international virtual event, or join Kent and Sue in the Bay Area on the 11th, the 18th. And just to participate and be a part of the solution. It's a great event just to participate in and know that you were part of the solution. So thank you again all for joining us today. Thank you, Kent. Thank you, Lee, for your help today. And we will see everybody next time. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.